Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I'm so excited about today's guest and today's entrepreneur because this is someone that as soon as our team came across her work, we realized she is so aligned with one of our core values here at the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast because we believe that a rising tide lifts all boats, and today's entrepreneur, actually, Rise is in the title of her company. Her company is called People Rise, and the headline on her website, as soon as we saw it, we knew we had to invite her on the show. It says, helping your people rise to real business challenges. So let me tell you all about today's guest. Her name is Susan Mahaffee. She's the founder and president of People Rise LLC, which is a consulting firm specializing in HR solutions and executive leadership coaching. With over 20 years of experience in HR and leadership, Susan has a distinguished career as an HR executive and strategic advisor. She holds a master's degree in global business and organizational leadership and a bachelor's in management with a focus on human resources management, along with multiple certifications in leadership in HR. So it's pretty clear. She loves people and she loves helping people flourish and succeed. Her professional journey includes significant roles at multinational corporations like Mars Incorporated, where she honed her expertise in global HR dynamics. In 2022, she launched People Rise to empower organizations by placing people at the heart of their strategies. There's so much that we're going to learn from her today, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Susan Mahaffee. All right, Susan, I'm so excited to have you here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Heck yes, you obviously have so much experience doing such cool work. I'm excited to dive into all that today, but before we get there, take us beyond the bio. Who's Susan? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. So a little bit about me. In that case, I started my feet getting wet in HR through a summer job. My dad knew that I liked talking to people, I liked organizing things, so he got me a job working part-time during my junior year of high school. And that was kind of my first foray into HR, and I really liked it. And then that kind of turned into a summer job again, senior year. And then when I got to college and I needed to work, because I worked full-time while going to college, I was like, well, the only skills I really have are in HR. And so that really kind of put off a light bulb for me that said, this is what I love to do, this is what comes naturally, and kind of the rest, I guess, is history.
Yeah, Susan, I love that overview because even in your bio, HR comes up so many times, but I will say, as an outsider looking in at your work and your business, it seems to go far beyond HR. And there's something that you wrote in your messaging. I love the term people leadership. And to me, that encompasses probably HR would lump into that. A lot of things would lump into that. So I want to ask you at that really high level, when you think about your field and all of the things that you do with People Rise, what does that encompass?
Yeah, I think you make one really important point, Brian, that is, I use the term HR and, human resources because it's what people know. But the reality is human resources, I think, is kind of a term of the past. And really, we are focused around people and people leadership. And that's really where my focus in my business is about, right? So people are at the center of your business. They're at the center of everything that we do in life, right? And from there, I think this is where the magic happens. So in People Rise, I have a couple of key things that I focus on. One of my kind of core signature offerings is something called an organizational assessment, for example. And the way I describe that is everybody usually, if you can think of, needs to go to the doctor, let's say once a year and get a wellness check. Well, organizations need that too. And I like to do that from a people standpoint because it's a really good practice to understand, what's the health of your organization? What are your people feeling? How are they doing? And it doesn't mean that there has to be something wrong, but, we also need to strive for kind of understanding what's going well, what's not, what do we want to improve upon? And so that's one of the things that the majority of my folks will come to me with something that they're not really sure what to do or where to go, or they're at different stages in their business. And they're like, Susan, here's what I've got, and help me. And so that's usually where I'm trying to parse out and untangle whatever is happening in their organization and figuring out a path and a plan. So that's one of the key things we do, Brian. And then kind kind of the things lead from there. We also do executive recruitment, which is not something I had planned to do, but building on organizational assessments. When you get to know your clients really well and they trust you, that is a key, just a key component of saying, hey, you've helped us realize the things we need to work on. Can you help us find the people that are going to continue to take our business in the next direction, that are going to elevate the things that we've also recognized? So that wasn't something I got into, but I absolutely love it. I feel like it's being a matchmaker with people and their organizations. And a few other things that we do is I do executive leadership coaching, and I primarily focus on small to mid-size family-owned businesses and entrepreneurs, and I have really enjoyed working with that group. Small business owners essentially are my ideal client. And a few other things we'll do hourly advisory, we'll do project work, we'll do anything from employee surveys to just kind of roundtables. And I have a partnership, last thing I'll mention is I have a partnership with the Center for Creative Leadership, also known as CCL. And I'm a graduate of many of their programs, and their work resonates with me a ton around leadership principles. And so I feel that they do what they do best, which is come up with world-class training programs, and then I get to be the facilitator. So they're the cake, I'm the icing, and I bring it to your organization.
Ooh, Susan, I love me a good analogy, and you're dropping quite a few on us here today. And I want to start with the fact that I love the likening of the annual physical exam. It's something that we all do. And what I think is an important distinction that you called out there is that we do our annual physical exam, not necessarily when something's wrong. We do it because we don't know what's going on inside of our blood, inside of our heart, inside of our body. And we need an expert to look into those things and actually assess that. So, Susan, with that hat on, I'd love to hear some of the things that when you walk into a company or when you're working with someone new, what are those areas that you assess?
Mm-hmm. Great question. I just am starting a new endeavor with a new client right now, actually, and so this is really top of mind. I mean, I think there's a couple parts, Brian, right? The first thing is usually there's something that has happened that has led us to this point. For example, perhaps your people function sat with an administrative person, maybe it sat in finance, maybe you haven't really had anything and you're trying to figure out. So usually my first question is around, okay, tell me more about how you got here. What does that journey to here look like? So kind of like you asking me, what is that? How did you get here? So that's the first component. And then we start to just, pretty much peel the onion back around what are the things that are top of mind? What keeps you up at night? What are you worried about? What do you think if you were to wave a magic wand? What would you do? What if money was no option? You're trying to ask really powerful questions to understand and kind of find the direction in which maybe your client doesn't even know that they want to or need to go. It's just trying to get a sense for where are they at this moment. And from there, I can kind of pick a couple different directions to go in. One thing might be around perhaps we need to really understand some of our leadership. Perhaps we have leaders that have way too many people reporting to them and no one's getting anything of what they need. Maybe we have struggles with reporting structure. Maybe we have challenges with work shifts. I mean, it could be any array of things that you can think about. But the most important piece here is we want people to feel comfortable. We want people to provide their thoughts and suggestions. And we really want to make sure that this process is around kind of being narrow in scope in one sense, because we're focusing on the people element, but we want to be broad in saying, what are the things that are top of mind for you all, right? Employees, business owners, etc. And that's usually where we go into. One final thing I'll add to that is probably also that there are challenges in our workplace today that people have not encountered before. We've got 5 generations in the workforce. We're still kind of in this readjustment period after COVID and returning to work. I mean, you're seeing tons of press about returning to work. I mean, you're seeing those big companies make mandates. There's a lot of school of thoughts. There's some people who have been working nonstop and never had a work from home arrangement. So there's a lot of different things brewing. And I would be remiss to say that also we are in a time where people bring their whole selves to work. It used to be kind of like in our parents' generation, it was like we didn't talk about money, we didn't talk about family, maybe a little, but there was things that were politics, they were off limits. Now people are very open, they don't want to feel isolated, and they really want to feel like they're not alone. And so my job is to really see what can we bring to the forefront, and then how do we come up with some solutions. And so that can take any type of form.
Yeah, Susan, I love that answer. It sounds like you actually have a really interesting and fun job because you're working with the coolest thing in the world, which is, of course, people. And I really appreciate the fact that, as you said, you're peeling back the onion. And part of what I really hear, and it's because I'm biased as a podcast host, is the power of questions. Obviously, questions really dictate the value in the content of the answers that we're going to get. I always think about one of my favorite concepts in business is that Henry Ford quote, where he once said that if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And it's because people can feel their pain, but they don't necessarily always see the solution, especially when we're stuck inside the jar. It's hard to read the label from inside the jar. And so, Susan, I want to ask you this question of, how do you create that environment? Is it the types of questions you ask? Is it the energy that you're bringing to these engagements? How do you solicit the right types of answers and input from the people that you're interacting with?
Oh, I love that question. So, Brian, I think one of the things that has served me really well, and maybe not just zone of genius, but maybe my superpower, I would describe it as being approachable, being authentic. I think that could be an overused word, but I think what people want is connection. And so, my story about humble beginnings, I have parents who came from Hungary and sought a better life here in the US, and through hard work, was able to build a life for my sister and I. And I saw just some great examples and have been able to meet amazing people along the way. And I think because I have had the opportunity to also face a lot of struggles and hardships, and resilience is, I think, a component. I mentioned it earlier too, and something else I had written that I had shared with you beforehand, right, is I have many different roles, right? Mom, sister, caretaker, etc. And I think all of those roles personally also allow me professionally to connect with people. And one of the things you have to be careful about when you work in a role like HR or coaching, right, is it's not about me, it's about you. But people want to feel a level of connectedness. And so, everything from making people feel warm, making people feel like they're being heard and listened to, sharing back, it's kind of like there's active listening, right, where people, you're listening to them more than you're talking. Kind of like the 80-20 rule. And then there's also this component around really listening and sharing back, what did you hear them say? Kind of like a clarification, and I just think that has been something that's worked really well for me along the way. And people remember how you make them feel. In tough conversations, in particular, I've had to deliver many, but I've also been able to provide great news and also help develop people. And so people recognize what your kind of consistency or lack thereof is. And when you're in a role like HR and in leadership, when you make it to where I've been in the past too, people are always watching you, and you have to be a role model. It doesn't mean I always get it right, but it means that I'm not afraid to take ownership, and that I'm also unafraid to apologize or to say I could have done that differently, and solicit feedback from others and get their thoughts. And when people can share with you, they're much more apt to make it a two-way. And so I think that's really what's stood out to me over the years.
Yeah, Susan, I'm going to call this out publicly because I so value and appreciate this about you personally in the work that you do, is that you don't shy away from those labels. And I'm going to call this out is that the reason why I think you're able to use those is because you look for the lessons from those different identities that you have and the different hats that you wear, because a lot of people have all of these labels. You're a mom, you're a daughter, you're a wife, you're a sister, a caregiver, a friend, a confidant. You're all of these things, but you don't just fulfill those roles. You actually look for the lessons inside of them. And even beyond that, I feel like traditionally in the world of HR, we try to keep a professional face and we try to put those labels to the side, whereas it feels like you embrace those. Talk to us about that different approach, because it's so clear that you're wearing those labels on your sleeves. You're doing it here in this episode today, and I'd love to hear how it manifests in your work to give you some of those more additional insights.
Yeah. So Brian, I'm going to share some real raw, examples for you, because one of the learnings I had is that, again, when you can be unafraid and vulnerable to share your own experiences, remember, people see you one way, right? We all have our own internal biases because we're humans, right? But on the other hand, people will only see me like, they'll hear me on this podcast or they see a picture of me. People will make assumptions, but they don't always know what's behind it. And there's a very clear example that comes to me. And so during COVID, for example, during the pandemic, let's just take us back to March 2020. I was going through a very hard time personally. And this was also at the time where things were shutting down. My work traveled extensively internationally. That was shutting down. And I thought, this is going to be a welcome break. I could use a minute to not be on the road on an airplane and going in different time zones and such. And also, I had a 5-year-old at the time, and that turned into me teaching my kindergartner home, teaching him from home while I'm trying to do work on multiple time zones and such. And the reality was, Brian, I became very overwhelmed. And HR folks during the pandemic, we were thrust into the same storm, but we were all in different boats, right? So, we're trying to not only manage our families and our situations, but then we're also trying to help our workforces and our workplaces. HR folks, we became kind of the leaders of what do we do? Oh my gosh. And so there was a lot of respect gained, I think, for those in the people function. But what happened is we also, and I did, when you're accustomed to being a giver, you also sometimes don't know where to stop. And so I was recognizing that I was doing everything I could and working really late and just was burning it at both ends, right? And I got to a point where I maxed out. And I completely had this almost like, crisis moment of, oh my gosh, what is going on in my life? This is so overwhelming. And what that ended up doing, Brian, is I had to take a step back. I had to step away from a long decade plus-ish, 15 years-ish type of career where I hadn't taken a break. I had just always gone from one role to the next and just kept climbing and kept going. And one of my friends said, you haven't stopped, Susan. And I was like, wow, you're right. And so then I was taking the approach of, wow, it's me. I'm an employee too. I'm a person. I'm not just an HR or people leader or somebody who others look up to, but now it's me who needs the help. It's me who needs to figure out, what do I need to do? And when I came back, I had to take some time for me and get my, self in order. And again, personally, I was dealing with, the end of my, my marriage and dealing with my son, and it's hard times. And I specifically remember thinking to myself, I'm like, this is one more thing I can add to my list. It's funny, but not funny. But when you understand the pains and the difficulties that people have to try to keep it together, like, you learn so much about that, and you can bring that with you. And when I came back, I also advocated to my employer about more mental health benefits, and I lived the system myself too. I knew what was broken in the system. I knew, we weren't able to get care for people quickly. Also during the pandemic, it was hard. But I share that story to say I was very open. I was very vulnerable about sharing that, I had hit my limits, and this is something we have to take serious. And also I decided that, I could stay quiet and kind of, act like nothing happened or such, but there's so many people that, and I'm glad that in the world today we can be more open about it, but it was a long way to get here. And so I try to use those personal experiences of my own that are not, nobody wants to kind of share the bad stuff, but for me, that's where the learnings are. And it reminds me of a book Daniel Pink wrote about, regret, and that it's okay to have regret because regret propels you forward. Like, you have to look backwards in order to learn to move forward. And I think that's a concept for me that has been so powerful. And ever since that time, and here we are, 4 or 5 years later, I continue to take those experiences with me. And, when I'm sharing and talking with others, and I can relate, people feel, again, that connectedness with you. And it doesn't mean I always have to share about me, but saying, hey, I hear you. I know what you mean. People can tell if you're just telling them that or you've been there.
Yeah, Susan, I love that answer, and I so appreciate that authenticity and vulnerability. You're right. Those are words we throw around so frequently, especially in the world of entrepreneurship and branding and all of these other areas. But it's real. Like, it shows up in that stuff. And that's why ever since I started this podcast way back in 2016, I committed to myself back then of I want to share these real entrepreneurial stories, and seeing how it shows up in your work as well. That's the value add. And that's why in a world where there's so many people who do HR and people leadership, I know that that's one of your unique differentiators. Susan, even hearing you tell those stories, it takes me back. One of the most valuable lessons that I learned in life was in 2019. I was so frustrated at this time. So I just bought a Tesla. It was my first electric car, and I was going on a road trip with my girlfriend at the time, and we were going from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And so I'm type A, and so I was like, come on, let's get ready, get all your stuff. Like, let's go. We're going to be in Vegas in 4 hours. This is going to be amazing. But my car didn't have batteries, Susan. And so we had to drive to the nearest Tesla supercharger, and it's Los Angeles. Everybody has a Tesla. So there was a long line to charge. And my girlfriend at the time, she said to me, she's like, you made me get ready for what? And I said, well, I said this jokingly, Susan, but it turned into a life lesson for me. I said, you got to be ready. You got to be ready to go fast, but you also got to be ready to go slow, because we had to sit there for an hour and wait for a charger. And it's something that shows up in your work. And hearing your stories that you're sharing with us today, it doesn't surprise me that in your work with leaders, even if we branch into your executive work, you wrote about going slow to go fast. And I feel like it's these counterintuitive lessons that we learn through some of the hard times, through the good things, that really differentiate us and give us that perspective. Talk to us about going slow to go fast, because none of us want that, but it's an inevitability in life and business. So I'd love to hear those insights.
It's a great. I love that that Tesla story. I can relate. So I would say this, Brian. I encounter a lot of leaders, especially in the small to mid-sized business space, which is where I am, where I will encounter leaders who are super impatient. They want things done yesterday. They're frustrated when they're, it's kind of like, I don't know, this is an old TV show, like The Whammy, like it would just like pop up and you're like, it was like anytime something pops up for these leaders, they're totally out of sorts. And I've also interviewed many people in the past where I'm looking for that. If I see that you're looking to go for a senior position and, you're thrown off kilter because your interview schedule got changed around, I'm like, okay, this is a pretty high level role. I've got some questions, and it's not to say people can't work on those things, but you kind of need to know what are your strengths and what are your opportunities, right? And how are you actively working on them? I've got leaders who I had this yesterday. I'm trying to slow them down, right? Because they are trying to do great things, perhaps too. On the other hand, I love that. Like, they're really passionate. They want to get things done. But it's not yet, because I think they're also going to make quick decisions at the consequence of having to deal with it later. That includes people who are rushed to fire folks. That's at a rush of people to hire folks because they get into panic mode. A lot of times I have leaders who just stall themselves out, meaning, let's just take the car example, right? Like, they can't get into the right gear. Like, they're stalling the car out. They're driving a stick shift and it's not working. I mean, they are blocking their own progress. And a lot of times what they need is someone who is not in the middle or the thick of it, but understands enough to be powerful, to get them to think differently. And, with leaders, who are seeking my counsel, and coaching and consulting is different, right? On the coaching side, I'm asking you questions and the answer. I'm just here to help it come out. On the consulting side, you're looking for my expertise, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. That's not to say I won't invite you to consider some of my thoughts, but the idea here is, I like to do a mixture of that all the time, because I believe that leaders and anyone who is willing to look at themselves, have some self-awareness, and someone who can kind of pull out what they're seeing and noticing. And oftentimes it's about speed, it's about pace. People are like, okay, like, it resonates, they get it. And one last thing I'll say about that is, I usually have to define it for people. Like, what do you mean, Susan, by go slow to go fast? And, people who know me well, they laugh because I have some of these coined phrases. But, I think this is also the importance of knowing thyself, surrounding yourself with a coach, for example, I can't say it enough, right? That if you are an entrepreneur, it is lonely at the top, just like it can be in the people space, right? As I did as an HR exec, right? You need to have places and avenues where you can do some thinking that will also allow you to weigh different scenarios. I love scenario planning, like just being able to kind of think things out and test your own speeds, kind of like your golf swing. It's all about tempo. These are things that I think leaders can never underestimate.
Yeah, Susan, I love that distinction that you make between that coaching and consulting role of the people have the answers versus I'm here to help guide you to the answers that I have from my own experience and my own knowledge. When I think about the work that you do with regards to leadership, and I'm staring at the headline on your website, Susan. It's such a powerful one. Helping your people rise. Obviously, that is so core to everything that your business does. And it makes me ask you this question of the role of leadership. When we think about the distinction of coaching and consulting, there's so many different ways that leadership can manifest. There's so many different styles. There's so many different roles we can play. We can be the mentor, we can be the guide, but also I'm not a parent, but I would imagine there's a parenting analogy here where we can push our kids a little bit and be like, yeah, take those risks. Like, I'm here to catch you if you fall, but you also have to go out there and explore. So Susan, with all of those different avenues and roles that we can play as leaders, from your vantage point, what is that role of a leader? How is it that we help our people rise with so many different options and roles that we can fulfill?
Yeah, I mean, wow, there's so many parts to that, Brian, right? Things that come to my mind first are around this concept of every leader has a shadow. And I try to make sure that leaders I work with understand. And they're like, what do you mean? And I say, well, just think about it as, you're in the sun and then there's a shadow. Sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's more narrow, depending on what angle you're standing at, right? But remember, people are always watching. It's like the concept of a 24-hour leader. If you're a 24-hour leader, everything you do on and off the court, for example, I love sports analogies, people are watching. They are watching you. They're judging you. They're seeing how you behave. They see and particularly watch when the going gets tough. What do you do? And I think that's one of the most defining moments also in my career has been working for some very senior people who I have been disappointed to see how they would say one thing and do another. Eventually, that's kind of where my career then turned into running my own business, because I decided, and what was important to me is that I want to be with people. In the case of People Rise, I want to see people who want to rise up. I want to see people who want to be better. I want to see people who don't settle for the mediocrity or the it's got to be this way or we've always done it this way. I'm looking to be part of building leaders who say, I don't know how to get there, but I want it. And, that shadow, knowing that people are watching you, that concept of trying to be better. People want to work for those leaders. I mean, we can use tons of examples from the military to other professions and occupations where people talk about leaders eating last, or leaders who've made tough choices when no one was looking, and the amount of credibility that they gain. And I think for me, leadership is about setting an example. I believe in role modeling very strongly in every part of my life. Same example I would do for my 10-year-old, right? I'm trying to role model behaviors for him because children live what they learn. I'm trying to make sure that he sees, his mom who's building a business, and it's hard, but it's so fulfilling. And, I tell him about, he even wished me good luck for this podcast. So, it's really important that at all stages of life and everybody we touch, that we're never going to always get it right. But if we're unafraid to express where we, need to work on something and be better, or we fell short, that's what's going to gain you credibility. And that's what true leadership is. And so there's one last thing I'll say is that I don't know how this had stuck with me, but at one point I had this thought. I was having, something to eat and drink at let's just say like at a bar, at a restaurant with a friend. We were meeting up. And the first question I find a lot of times people say is like, hey, how are you? How are you doing? How's your family? How's work? Every conversation seems to go this way, right? Ask yourself the last time you went out and met someone. And I remember thinking to myself, the first thing I think about is my boss, right? How's work usually means the person I'm working for and the work I'm kind of doing. And I had this moment where this light bulb went off, and I said, I want to be the leader that no matter who is sitting at this table, anybody who works for me in particular, I would want them to say, I love the person I work for. I love the work that I'm doing. My leader supports me. I can give them feedback. I can feel like, I might not always agree with her decisions, but she's willing to listen and give me her thoughts, etc. She can be direct, she can be hard on the issues and soft on the people. And so I just had this thing that has stayed with me, Brian, over the years, where I just think about trying to be the leader that it doesn't mean that everything I do is perfect or right. But I think people genuinely know if you have good intention and you're trying to do the right things. And that's kind of something that's kind of stuck with me about the kind of person that I try to be, the kind of leader I try to be. And also when my clients hire me, that they know that this is the type of person that is right alongside them and helping them with their journey.
Boom. Susan, that sets such a high bar for all of us in our lives, in our businesses. And it's something that I knew you'd bring that heat in today's episode. And you've so delivered on all of that, honestly, with so much different insights and knowledge and perspectives and experiences that you can glean from. So I really appreciate that. Also makes me really excited to ask you this final question, because it's so broad that you can take it in any direction that you want. And that is, what's that one takeaway, that one piece of advice, knowing that we're being listened to by entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their growth journeys? What's that one thing that you want to leave them with today?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. I mean, the first thing that goes to me, we've talked a little bit about it with go slow to go fast. I mean, something that I like to tell people is don't forget to scenario plan. And what I mean by that is this. If you're facing a tough decision, if you're looking to grow, if you're walking through the what ifs, if you're, just feeling like you don't know where to go, ask yourself a bunch of questions, kind of putting yourself on the other side, right? What questions would you have? How would you feel about it? What if I were to approach it this way? What's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? So one of the things I love to do is just bring out also in those that I work with around, ask yourself the what ifs. Ask yourself these questions about how it could look differently. Because remember too, if you make a mistake or you drop the ball, it's okay. The best laid plans can always fall short. But I think there's a piece in here around if you're prepared, which is something I believe strongly, is that even if you are trying to prepare yourself as best as possible by thinking through things in advance, and you go and you show up for a meeting, for a proposal, or for whatever, people can still tell if you've put thought in it that maybe, that message didn't land, but you're willing to own it, or you're willing to kind of course correct, or you're willing to just say, hey, let's figure it out. People are always going to trust you more, and that will always take you farther if you take a bit of time to kind of think about the possibilities. I think it's worked well for me, and that's something I would definitely suggest to our listeners, your listeners.
Yes, incredible advice for all of us. And I feel like all the best business advice extrapolates into just really good life advice as well. So I so appreciate that, Susan. For listeners who are probably thinking, just like myself, Susan, we don't want you to go just yet. We want more Susan knowledge and insights and goodness. The good news is you put out so much good stuff in the way that you show up in the world. Your business website, I've kind of teased it a little bit here in our conversation today, but there's just so much good stuff there. Aside from the great taglines that make us feel inspired, and I'm a big sucker for quotes. So when I see "we rise and succeed together," it just inspires me to really raise that bar in my own life and in my own businesses. But aside from that, you have so many things on your business website. Like your about section isn't just about your company like every other business website. You've got a whole page dedicated to your mission, your vision, your values, your approach. You've got a blog. You have some short form videos on your YouTube channel. So Susan, I know how difficult it is to create all of that content. So for listeners who want to continue their journey and all the great work that you do and all the valuable stuff you put out there, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, I'm really excited right now, Brian. I've got some great short reels coming up. One of them actually went out today on Instagram, so at People Rise LLC, so all one word. And at People Rise, we are trying to be really authentic too. I've got some fun things where I give advice about team building coming up. Today I talked about performance reviews, like, hey, how do you set that conversation up for success? And I talk about not being your typical, again, we use the term HR, but I'm trying to be really real, about the things I think that today's folks want to hear about. And I love hearing from others around any topics. So, on Instagram, you can also, leave a comment, send me a message, let me know what you want to hear about. But I think Instagram at People Rise LLC. You can also find me there on Facebook at the same tag, and also on LinkedIn. So People Rise LLC is the way to find us.
Yes, listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find Susan and her company, People Rise. Down below in the show notes, we're dropping all those links to her social media handles, her personal LinkedIn, as well as her business website at peoplerisellc.com. Super easy to remember, but you don't have to, because you can click right on through from the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning in. So, Susan, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a pleasure.